Welcome to our episode of Biblical Archaeology, From the Ground Down. Presented by Bible Interact and hosted by Dr. George Sparks. Join us as we explore the fascinating world of the Bible from leading experts in the field of archaeology.
Well, welcome everybody. I hope you're having a good day. My name is Dr. George Sparks. I have with me today my special guest, Dr. David Graves. He has his PhD from the University of Aberdeen, Scotland, a native of Canada. Has been involved in teaching the Bible and archaeology for more than 35 years. He's a retired assistant professor from Liberty University, Rawlings School of Divinity at Lynchburg, Virginia. He has taught archaeology at the Oxford University, England, provided tours at the Ashmolean and the British Museum, has traveled extensively throughout the Middle East, has been involved in Mount Ararat research, the consultant to the National Geographic, has been involved also in Qumran, the Temple Mount, and Shiloh in Israel. He has also been a chief excavator, my dig supervisor at Tel el-Hammam excavation project in Jordan. In 2017, he was part of a team which was looking for remnants of the Dead Sea Scrolls in cave number 53. Because of its identification as once having scrolls, is now dubbed Q12, Qumran Cave 12. For many years, David has been a field supervisor for Tel el-Hammam during the Middle Bronze Age and also Roman period and Byzantine period from 2005 to 2019. He is also a member of the Near Eastern Archaeological Society, NEAS. He has authored a number of books published through his company, Electronic Christian Media, ECM, and I do recommend people go out, look up his book, buy his book. It's very informative books. In addition, is an author of a number of journal articles on the Bible and archaeology, mostly available at academia.edu. Welcome to the program. Before we get going, let me say this. We're going to be looking at the Land of Goshen, which would be the north part of Egypt, the northern Nile Delta. Doctor, what do you have for us in the Land of Goshen today?
We're going to be talking about the Land of Goshen. This is where the Israelites were living just prior to the conquest. So during the Exodus years, this is where the Israelites were living. Up in the, it's actually called the Delta region or Lower Egypt, even though it's on the north end of Africa. The Delta region is called Lower Egypt in opposition to the southern Nile region, which is called the Upper and then the Lower Egypt. So it's a bit confusing. It's a bit upside down. It's because the River Nile runs down into the Mediterranean. Just a bit of a geography lesson for folks. We're also going to talk a little bit about Indiana Jones today, because some of these places are mentioned in his movies and kind of focuses around with the Raiders of the Lost Ark. So it should be a fun exploration.
1 second, because I got to get ready for Indiana Jones, but you know. I don't know. It doesn't look like one of those Egyptian beards, but it's going to have to do. It's not going to work, is it?
No.
What if I hold it down like this?
There you go. Yeah, that'll work.
This is like, so let it be written.
Let it be written.
All right.
This is an AI rendition of what Indiana Jones looks like, so there's no copyright on this. And it's got looks like a mummy in the back seat. So we're going to talk about the home of the Hebrews and Indiana movies. As always, it's based on the information found in my book on the archaeology of the Old Testament. And you'll see the footnotes there. I bring the receipts. So every page has a number of footnotes on the page where you're reading. So you'll be able to see what's going on. Now, I was there in 2005 with an ABR Egypt tour. This was just archaeological sites. This is our large crew. A number of folks there are good friends. Sad thing is that 3 of them I know have already gone on to be with the Lord. So we're all getting older. Mount Giza, traveling around. My favorite part's riding camels. I love them better than horses. I don't know, it must be the Indiana Jones in me or something, or the T.E. Lawrence in me. But I love the camels. The places we're going to talk about is Tanis. The biblical name is Zone. We looked at el-Retabah on one of the previous podcasts, but I just wanted to point it out as Pi-Ramses there. So this is the group of cities all around the same region up here in the Nile Delta region, the land of Goshen. el-Retabah, we're going to talk about that a little bit. Pithom, and then Muskota, Succoth. And then, of course, you've got the Bela Lake. I don't have a couple of photos of that, but it's where some suggest that was the land, or the Reed Sea that they crossed to get into the Sinai Peninsula. When we were there, you could see the lake, and it still had a lot of reeds growing in it. But this whole region here has dried up, so it's not as plush as it was in the early biblical period. So the Nile River comes down and branches off, and all these branches. There's only 2 of them that are still flowing today. The rest of them have all silted in. So Goshen is a territory assigned to Jacob and his family. It is the location in the land of Goshen and was near the royal palace where Joseph served as the vizier. And that was el-Retabah. We looked at that the previous podcast. Palace of Joseph was there. So Tanis is the first spot. It's called Janat in Egyptian. The Old Testament calls it Zone, and today it's San el-Hagar. So it has 3 different names, well, actually 4, because we call it Tanis today in English. It's the reign of the Tanite kings in Herod's 3rd intermediate period. It's kind of an interesting site because it's very flat with a few hills around and all these monuments sticking out. It's because it was a major capital of Egypt's 21st and 22nd dynasty. Tanis just disappeared with the shifting course of the Nile River. And so it has become a very hard to get to, not a lot of tourists, a few because of Indiana Jones movies, because it was highlighted in that. The archaeologists, however, have uncovered a treasure trove of artifacts in the 1930s by a French archaeologist by the name of Motet at the site, including temples and tombs filled with golden masks, jewelry, coffins, and other treasures rivaling those of the discoveries of King Tut. If it wasn't for the Second World War that broke out after he discovered it, this Frenchman, and excavated there, it probably would have rivaled King Tut. But few people actually even know about this site and the discoveries that were found there. They're displayed in the Cairo Museum today. Here is one of the sphinxes from Tanis, that's in the Louvre Museum. Here are some of the gold artifacts that were discovered at Tanis. They're now in the museum in Cairo. Here's another one. Some examples. There's a lot of gold artifacts and beautiful jewelry that was discovered. So as I mentioned, it was highlighted in the Raiders of the Lost Ark. So this was partially historical in that it was discovered in the 1930s, before the Second World War. And the script goes that the Nazis said it was buried by a sand dune. That's not true. And then the Nazis discovered it when they were exploring it and found the Ark of the Covenant there. That's not true either. But it does highlight the fact that Tanis did exist as an archaeological site, and that they found a lot of amazing things there. The film itself was actually filmed in Tunisia at Khartoum. And there is the one of the royal palaces in Khartoum. You can see the narrow streets. If you remember the movie, how they were racing down the streets and going through the marketplace and what have you. That's where the movie was filmed, not at Tanis. And then, of course, they went out into the desert and did the filming there because of the sand dune of the Nazis finding the Ark of the Covenant. So the movie took place in Tanis, or Tunisia, sorry, but they mentioned Tanis in the movie and highlight it. But none of the Indiana Jones movies were ever filmed in Egypt. Some in Jordan. We have the Petra and the treasury in Petra that was filmed with the movie Last Crusade. That was the movie that they filmed at at Petra in Jordan. It was kind of interesting, the trivia about the movie. Indiana Jones movie that was filmed there. Spielberg said it was the worst filming that he ever did because all of the crew went out and started eating at the local markets and they got sick. So when they were at Tanis, going to the shops, but Spielberg didn't get sick because he brought his food from Europe onto the site, and so he didn't get sick. And you remember one of the sword scenes, they had to cut part of it out or shorten it actually because they couldn't film the whole thing because the guy was so sick from lack of water, and he was having real problems. So they ended up shortening the scene, the sword scene that they had practiced for so long. And also the temperature was up in the 40s, I think 43 degrees Celsius, which is over 110 degrees. So it was pretty warm there, and they were really suffering, so they could only do short scenes. So some trivia from the Indiana Jones movies surrounding Tanis in Egypt. Well, Tanis looks like this today, a lot of ruins, a lot of, you can see the artifacts laying on the ground. There's a map, a really high-end map there on Tanis. Royal tombs pointing to the right. You know, it's they invested a lot of money in for the tourists to do their maps, hand drawn on a piece of cardboard or something. You can see some of these the name just terrible getting old. You forget all these things so well. George, help me out there. Those are called.
What, you mean that structure right there? Obelisk?
Obelisk. Thank you. Oh, terrible getting old. There's one of the pictures. I'm not sure which pharaoh that is. Could have been Ramses II. It's a bit like that in the other museum. Just a few shots I had taken while I was there on my trip. So that's the area we're talking about. We've already talked about Tel Dabeh, Avaris, Pi-Ramses, modern Esbet Helmi, and the four-room houses down here. Dabeh was the center of the international trade network that included el-Retabah and Tel Maskuta. And those are the two we're going to talk about, Pithom and Succoth, operated by the Hyksos. So this three cities were sort of in a little bit of a trade network, and they were important. And we find evidence that the Asiatics, the Hebrews, lived in this region. Pithom, el-Retabah. So it was discovered by the Swiss explorer Edward Neville. Neville's there. And then we also have Sir Flinders Petrie in the 1880s worked there, the German archaeological team. A Canadian survey was done of the Wadi Tumlat in 2007 to 2012. A Slavic Egyptological team had taken part in the Polish Slovak excavations there. So it's been excavated and worked around quite a bit. So a well-known site, but not probably well known to a lot of biblical archaeologists. The significance is that the Asiatics were living in Egypt in four-room houses made without straw. We find that there as well as el-Retabah. This is what one of the houses looks like today. See a lady carrying her children like they would have done back in the biblical times, but the houses were mud brick, flat roofs. So it was like walking back in time, visiting this site, really, as though you were really there. Beautiful date palms in the background and sarcophagus, little village. Here we have the painting in one of the tombs depicting how they made their mud bricks from the Amun Temple at Thebes, some of their instruments. You see their mold. Here's one in the museum that's made out of wood from the Met Museum in the United States. And so they put their mud in this and they would let it dry in the hot sun. This is how they would make their mud brick. We'd actually made one of these and used it at Tel el-Hammam, used the mud, and we wanted to reinforce the walls. So we did it in a natural fashion instead of just putting some stones up. So we built some of our own mud brick using the same kind of a mold. Here we have the wall, mud bricks made without straw. You don't see any pieces of straw in it. Here's another photograph I took from another location. This wasn't at el-Retabah. I forget the exact location, but you can see the straw in the mud brick. And that was like rebar. It helped the mud bricks stay together. And this is from another site. So we have mud brick made with straw, and then we have mud brick made without straw. You remember the story in scripture where the Pharaoh, as a punishment, said you have to make mud brick now without straw, which is more difficult because the straw holds the mud bricks together and helps them to hold their shape. So instead of them falling apart, the straw in them kept them nice and firm. And so we have it in two different periods, two different areas, some made with straw, some made without straw. And here is the village itself with some of the ruins today. The people still live there just among the ruins. So you can imagine going out every day and finding pottery in the piles. And here we have some straw. They're actually using it as a threshing floor. And their livestock are feeding all in the area. And the next site we're going to take a look at is Tel el-Muskuta, the site of Succoth. And it is up here, just almost across the road. It's a few miles away, but it's very close. It was identified in the 1800s by Naval as well and Sir Flinders Petrie. In 78 to 85, the University of Toronto, under the direction of John Holliday, did research there. Now, it's interesting that my good friend of mine, two of my good friends, have studied under Holliday, Brian Wood and Doug Petrovich studied under John Holliday. But his claim to fame is that he did the survey and worked in this particular region with the University of Toronto. So there's a Canadian connection. I'm from Canada as well. The biblical significance was that the Asiatics were living in Egypt in 4-room mud brick houses made without straw, the same as the other cities. And the city, Succoth, is actually mentioned in scripture. We also have the temple of Atum there. More recent analysis has demonstrated that the designation for the temple of Atum, Pitum, can be found in inscriptions at Retabah and Muskuta. So we have inscriptions from there. I haven't gone into all the details of everything they have found in the two regions or the two cities, but this seems to demonstrate that the name Pithum was used originally for the earlier site of Retabah before it was abandoned, and then it was rebuilt at Muskuta, the newer city. Jacob journeyed to Succoth and built him a house and made booths for his cattle, and therefore the name of the place is called Succoth, shelters. So the Israelites journeyed from Ramses to Succoth. There were about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children, Exodus 12:37, if you accept particular numbers as sort of base 10 numbers and not an exaggeration, sort of bragging about how their numbers were larger than they were. Not in an exaggeration. it's more of an honorific. Our king is bigger than your king. Our nation is bigger than your nation. That kind of thing. It's more honorific, which was very common practice in the ancient Near East. And there we have a close-up of some of the ruins at Succoth, as it was in 2005. It's another one here. Some more of the rooms, 4-room houses. Those have all been identified and published. Okay, well, that's pretty well it for what we're going to be talking about today.
All right. Well, I went back to my regular background so I could display the hat, Oh, so when you talk about el-Retabah, just for the listening audience, we're looking at different layers in archaeology, strata levels representing different times. So it could be el-Retabah we're talking about, or the interesting part would be the time of the Asiatics, the Hyksos. If we want to put Joseph in that time period, that's what we're looking at. Okay. Another thing is that then it switches to, let's say, in the biblical narrative, it looks like I don't want to get into the pharaohs of the Exodus when that's done. We're looking at the time period where the Bible's talking about the Exodus. Now, whether late or not, early or late date, I'm not going to get into that. That's not the part.
No, and I don't get into dating a lot of that period because it's just too intricate and confusing. There's a lot of good arguments that can be made, as I've said, for both sites or both dates. I think what's important here is that we do find the evidence of the 4-room houses. We find evidence of the mud brick made without straw. That all fits into the biblical narrative and culture. So there's a syncretism with the archaeology, what we find in the archaeology and the biblical text. I'll leave the dating and all of that because they still haven't resolved that conundrum. And I don't want to get into it because it's like a quagmire.
But in the biblical narrative, when we're also looking at el-Retabah, and it's got different names. The other names are those are the names of the tells. When we're talking about the el-Retabah, that's current. Now, when you get into the biblical narrative, that's when you're going to have the Succoth, and you can read that in the biblical narrative. So you got both names there. And what we're doing in the PowerPoint, Dr. Graves he was associating the biblical name given with the archaeological determination of that location as well. So I don't want that to be confusing, but that's how we're associating archaeology with the location mentioned in the biblical text and how it was located, if you will. And he mentions
it's a bit like the old game we used to play, pin the tail on the donkey. So you find the site, and then you got to pin the tail on the name that the Bible calls it, and try to line it up with the geography and with the clues we find in the biblical text. So these are tentative, but they're accepted by most scholars that these were the biblical sites, as they were called, Succoth and Pithom and Pi Ramses. So it's pretty well accepted. Although some have moved them around, and you can debate about that all the time. But pin the tail on the donkey. You might get pretty close, maybe be off and put it on his hip. But
right. So you went through briefly a little slide of Tanis, Pi Ramses, the store city, and also the territory of Ramses. It was located there in the 19th dynasty, or I should say 18th, 19th dynasty. I don't want to get into that. And then the Clusiac branched the Nile, dried up. The artifacts there, the statues were moved to the location of Tanis. That's where we were talking about Tanis. In the biblical narrative, you're not going to find Tanis. It's going to be called Zoan, Zoan.
Yep.
Zoan, if you'd like to do a reference. In the movie Indiana Jones, that's why it talks about Tanis as being a location where the ark probably was taken. But this time, the Pharaoh, we could designate the Pharaoh for that, right? Shishak.
Yeah.
So when we went from the time period of, let's say, just say 8 Hyksos, 18th dynasty, 19th dynasty, and then we skipped, I believe, to the 22nd dynasty.
Yeah.
With the Pharaoh that made siege probably to Jerusalem, took treasure from the temple, possibly the ark. We can't say it, but in the movie it was the ark,
Yeah.
and took it to Tanis.
Now
And we know.
a little
Go
bit
ahead.
of trivia. The excavations at Tanis, they discovered the name of Shishonk II, which they had never knew existed before. We knew Shishonk I is mentioned in scripture, Shishak or Shishonk, but they found the name of Shishonk II in an inscription at Tanis, and they never knew that pharaoh existed before. So that was kind of interesting.
But I just wanted, and thank you for that. And so this is why the sites are important for the biblical narrative. Is that we have archaeological sites, the given name starting with El, and then the biblical narrative, that name also associated, such as, let's say, when you get to Ramses or Pi Ramses, in the Bible, Zoan and Tanis, and Dr. Graves has shown you on a map where these places were located up in the northern Nile Delta, which is also called up in the northern Nile Delta. Here's where it gets confusing. It's called Lower Egypt. Because
Yes.
remember, the Nile River is going to flow from the south to the north. Now, you're looking at it as a map, up and down. That's what we see, or even on a globe. But if you're on the land and the land is flat and you're standing on the land, to the south is the hill country. And the water's flowing from the hills, the high ground, down, forming the Nile River. And it's flowing because of gravity, it's flowing down into the Mediterranean. That's why we say Upper Egypt, Lower Egypt, even though in the map it looks like no, you guys are confused. That's why that's the case. All right. So to help the listening audience with a little bit of confusion, I actually this is very interesting because it's pinpointing on a map what was mentioned in the biblical narrative. And if you're just, I shouldn't say just reading the Bible, but to read the biblical narrative and it mentions place names, really, it means nothing. You just say, oh, nice. It's another name. It'd be like going to a town, let's say in Columbus, Ohio. So you say, oh, Columbus, Ohio. And then I'd say something like Galloway, Ohio, or, Mansfield, Ohio. And you're like, oh, what do you mean? Oh, so, okay. But with this PowerPoint, you actually got to look at where they are on the map and also the archaeological remains, what's there. So Dr. Graves has replaced what would just be in your mind as maybe an imagination for a location mentioned in the biblical narrative, with the actual site. They're really there. They have been excavated. So I think that part is extremely exciting.
Yes, and another thing to point out to the listening audience is that during different periods of history, you had pharaohs ruling in the Lower Egypt and then Upper Egypt. Sometimes they unified them together, and so it's quite a complex history over the centuries of how Egypt was all divided up, and we haven't got time to go into all those details. And I'm not an Egyptologist, but just for folks to know that in some periods of history there was, a pharaoh in the north, a pharaoh in the south. So there's an upper and lower. You could tell that they were ruling from the different periods because of their headdress. As you're wearing your headdress today, there was a different pharaoh from a different region, and you could tell from their statues which region they were ruling over based on their headdress. So a little bit of trivia.
Right. So let me ask you something. I got this headdress on, and I'm going to take it off and just see if I just want to see what the glare would be like, with the glare, without the glare,
You're looking good.
I need to go to Egypt and walk around with this on.
You need to grow your goatee out a little bit.
Just true, right? True. I could go to Egypt and say, let my people go. But right now I'd have to look around and say, hey, where'd they go? You ever see the Pharaoh say that? Say like, "Hey, wait a minute, where'd my people go?" But thanks for your time. It's been a great PowerPoint once again. Very informative. It puts meaning to the locations in the Bible. It really does, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, just a quick trip around to help everybody get a sense of the areas that we're talking about. So,
and everybody, you have a good day out there. Remember, like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.